My daughter yelled, "You're useless, get out." So I left quietly and made one call. By the end of the week, she lost everything. The air in the opulent dining room, usually filled with the gentle clinking of crystal and the low murmur of polite, if often superficial, conversation, was suddenly thick with an unbearable tension. Serafina Thorne, a woman whose elegant posture and gentle eyes belied the steel forged by decades of quiet endurance, sat at the head of the impossibly long mahogany table. Its gleaming surface reflected the elaborate chandeliers, casting a warm glow that did little to dispel the chill that had settled over the room. Around her, a tableau of her family, her daughter Bronwyn, Bronwyn's husband Sterling Beaumont, and their two teenage children, Madison and Ethan, feasted on a gourmet meal prepared by the private chef Serafina herself paid for. The aroma of roasted duck with cherry reduction and truffle-infused potatoes, usually a source of pleasure, now seemed cloying, almost suffocating. The mansion they resided in, a sprawling estate nestled in the hills overlooking the city, with its manicured lawns and infinity pool shimmering under the evening sky, was also maintained by Serafina's silent generosity. Yet, her presence often felt more like an inconvenient formality than a cherished anchor, a necessary but tiresome fixture in their otherwise perfect, lavish world. Tonight, the usual undercurrent of entitlement had surged into a torrent. Serafina, with a rare, gentle suggestion to her daughter about perhaps curbing their ever-escalating expenses, a quiet mention of the mounting maintenance costs for the yacht Bronwyn insisted on keeping, or the fifth redesign of the master suite, had inadvertently struck a nerve. The words, soft and tentative, were meant as a shared concern, a gentle nudge towards prudence, but they landed like an accusation. Bronwyn, a woman whose features, once soft with youthful promise, had hardened with an unyielding sense of privilege and an almost regal disdain for anything that challenged her comfort, slammed her fork down on her Limoges plate, the sound echoing ominously through the cavernous room. The delicate porcelain seemed to vibrate with the force of her indignation. Her perfectly coiffed hair, usually a testament to hours of careful styling, seemed to bristle, and her usually composed face, often held in an expression of bored elegance, contorted into a mask of pure, unadulterated fury. "Oh, for heaven's sake, mother!" Bronwyn's voice, usually modulated to a refined whisper designed to project an air of effortless superiority, rose to a shrill shriek that sliced through the expensive china and hushed the low classical music emanating from hidden speakers. The violins seemed to falter, their melodic strains suddenly jarring. "You're useless. Get out. We don't need your archaic opinions here. We are perfectly capable of managing our own affairs without your constant, unhelpful advice." The words hung in the air, sharp and poisonous, laced with a venom Serafina had long felt simmering beneath the surface but had rarely seen erupt so openly. They seemed to physically manifest, pressing down on her, stealing the air from her lungs. Madison and Ethan, her grandchildren, stared wide-eyed, their expressions a disquieting mix of embarrassment at their mother's public display and an unsettling, almost practiced indifference. They looked away quickly, back to their plates, as if this was merely a temporary inconvenience, a brief, unpleasant interlude in their otherwise undisturbed world of privilege. Sterling Beaumont, Bronwyn's husband, a man whose ambition vastly outstripped his actual talent and whose charm was as thin as his moral compass, merely offered a weak, dismissive wave of his hand, a silent affirmation of his wife's outburst. His eyes, usually calculating the next opportunity to extract wealth, held a flicker of impatience, as if Serafina's very existence, her gentle presence, was an impediment to their grand designs, a trivial obstacle in their path to eternal opulence. For decades, Serafina had absorbed every slight, every dismissive comment, every blatant demand for more. Each instance, a small, almost imperceptible chip in her spirit, yet cumulatively, they had created a hollow ache within her. She had built a fortress around her heart, a desperate, silent hope that one day, the genuine love she yearned for, the reciprocal affection she dreamed of, would somehow break through the callous facade her family had constructed. She had imagined a quiet afternoon tea where Bronwyn truly listened, a spontaneous hug from Madison, a genuine shared laugh with Ethan. But Bronwyn's words, delivered with such raw contempt in front of her grandchildren, shattered that last, fragile hope into a million irreparable pieces. This was not merely disrespectful, it was a public declaration of her irrelevance, a brutal disavowal of her humanity. It was a cold, deliberate act of severing, and for Serafina, it felt final. A profound silence descended upon the room, broken only by the rapid, almost frantic beating of Serafina's own heart. Her initial reaction was not anger, not the hot flush of indignation one might expect. Instead, it was a deep, icy ache, a sorrow so profound it threatened to consume her, to drag her down into a familiar abyss of quiet despair. Yet, amidst the pain, amidst the stinging humiliation, a new feeling began to stir within her, a cold, clear resolve she hadn't known she possessed. The last straw had not merely broken the camel's back, it had galvanized a dormant power within her, a strength that had been lying in wait, patiently, for this very moment of absolute clarity. Serafina slowly, deliberately, placed her linen napkin beside her untouched plate. The pristine white fabric seemed to mock the chaos within the room. Her gaze, usually soft, often clouded with unspoken hurt, now held an unreadable depth as she looked at her daughter. There was no anger, no visible hurt, no plea for understanding, just an unnerving stillness, a quiet assessment of the wreckage of their relationship. She pushed her chair back, the soft scrape of wood against the intricate patterns of the Persian rug the only sound, a gentle punctuation mark to the end of an era. Without another word, without a backward glance, she rose, a figure of quiet dignity, an embodiment of the profound shift that had just occurred within her, and walked out of the lavish dining room. She left behind the stunned silence, the lingering scent of wealth, resentment, and a gourmet meal she would never taste. The front door closed with a soft click, a sound barely audible, yet in its finality, it was louder than any shout, more definitive than any decree. Bronwyn and Sterling, still reeling from the unexpected quietude of her departure, from the sheer lack of a tearful argument or a desperate plea, were oblivious to the seismic shift that had just occurred. They had asked her to leave, and she had. And in leaving, she had taken with her the very ground upon which their extravagant lives stood, a foundation they had long assumed was eternally theirs. Serafina Thorne's life had once been a fairy tale of love and prosperity. Her late husband, Edward Thorne, had been more than just a business magnate, he was a man of profound vision and even greater heart. He had built Thorne Enterprises from the ground up, a sprawling conglomerate that touched everything from cutting-edge technology to bespoke luxury real estate. Edward's presence had filled their home with laughter and genuine affection, his philosophical approach to life inspiring Serafina deeply. He believed in giving, not just money, but time, attention, and true support. When he passed away peacefully 25 years ago, after a brief, dignified illness, he left Serafina not just with unimaginable wealth, but with a legacy of generosity and integrity, a blueprint for a life lived with purpose. He had always believed that true wealth lay not in what one accumulated, but in what one shared, in the lives one positively impacted. Serafina had embraced this philosophy, particularly when it came to her only daughter, Bronwyn. She had seen her daughter as Edward's precious legacy, a continuation of their shared love. From the moment Edward's will was read, Serafina had dedicated herself to ensuring Bronwyn's happiness. It was a silent vow she made to her beloved Edward, a promise to nurture their daughter and protect her from the harsh realities of the world. She wanted to give her daughter the freedom to pursue her dreams without the burden of financial worry, a luxury Serafina herself had only known after marrying Edward. Her support had begun subtly, with generous allowances and lavish gifts that were truly expressions of love, but it had gradually escalated into an unwavering, decades-long financial spigot that flowed freely and without question, morphing from acts of love into unquestioning obligation. Bronwyn's first car after college, a gleaming, top-of-the-line Mercedes S-Class, was a gift from Serafina, a symbol of her limitless love and a proud mother's desire to see her daughter thrive. "Drive safely, darling," Serafina had said, her eyes shining with maternal affection, as Bronwyn barely offered a perfunctory "thanks" before speeding off. A few years later, when Bronwyn and Sterling decided to settle down, Serafina provided the entire down payment for their first, starter, mansion in Bel Air, a palatial residence complete with a private tennis court and an Olympic-sized swimming pool, a property that most people would consider a lifetime achievement, not a starting point. "For your future, darling," Serafina had said, her voice soft, her heart overflowing with hope for their happiness, as Bronwyn merely nodded, already sketching plans for a new wing. Sterling, with his grand pronouncements of impending success and even grander failures that followed, quickly became another recipient of Serafina's boundless largesse. His first venture, a tech startup designed to revolutionize bespoke furniture sales, had burned through millions before collapsing spectacularly due to a fatally flawed business model and Sterling's inability to grasp basic market realities. Serafina, ever hopeful and ever supportive, convinced herself it was merely a learning experience and had quietly covered the losses, liquidating some of Edward's less prominent investments to do so. Then came the boutique hotel in Miami that never broke even, hemorrhaging money despite its chic facade, followed by a luxury car dealership that went bankrupt within 2 years, leaving a trail of unpaid debts and angry creditors. Each time, Serafina's private accounts, managed by her discreet and loyal financial team, would effortlessly absorb the damage. She provided capital, covered payroll, settled debts, often without Bronwyn or Sterling even knowing the true extent of the financial abyss they created. And always, she believed in Sterling's next big idea, clinging to the hope that one would finally succeed, justifying her continued support, even as her trusted advisors subtly warned her of the futility, their voices filled with thinly veiled concern. Mrs. Thorne, Alastair Davies, her principal banker, had gently suggested once during a quarterly review, his brow furrowed, Mr. Beaumont's ventures, while ambitious, have shown a consistent pattern of negative returns. The exposure is becoming rather significant. Serafina had merely smiled, a tight, weary smile. Edward always said one must invest in people, Alastair. And Sterling is family. The grandchildren, Madison and Ethan, were enrolled in the most exclusive private schools, their tuitions running into 6 figures annually. Serafina paid for their equestrian lessons, their elite tennis coaching, their international school trips to European capitals and tropical islands, and their designer wardrobes that seemed to change with the season. She would attend their school plays, their sports events, their graduations, always sitting alone in the VIP section, often overlooked by Bronwyn and Sterling who were too busy networking with other wealthy parents, or on their phones, managing their social calendars. Serafina's heart ached for a simple hug, a genuine conversation, a shared laugh, but they seemed to view her merely as a silent patron, a benevolent financial ghost who materialized only to solve their problems, a limitless resource to be tapped. The small, often forgotten gifts she would bring for the children, a rare first-edition book for Ethan, a delicate antique locket for Madison, were usually left unwrapped, discarded amongst the piles of expensive electronic gadgets and designer clothes their parents showered upon them. Holidays were particularly poignant. At Thanksgiving and Christmas dinners, held in the very mansion Serafina paid for, she would often find herself isolated amidst the throng of guests. Bronwyn would be too engrossed in her social calendar, flitting from one conversation to another, barely acknowledging her mother. Sterling would be too busy discussing his latest investment opportunity with potential new marks, his voice booming with feigned confidence. Serafina would observe their extravagant parties, the endless stream of caterers, florists, and entertainers, all paid for from her trust. She'd see Bronwyn draped in haute couture gowns, sparkling with diamonds, all purchased on credit cards Serafina paid off each month. The silence in her own large, elegant home on those nights, after she returned, felt heavier than ever, a stark contrast to the hollow revelry she had left behind. One particularly galling memory was Bronwyn's 50th birthday party. Serafina had organized and funded a lavish gala, flying in a renowned singer from Europe and decorating the mansion with 1,000 long-stemmed roses, their fragrance filling every room. Yet, when Serafina, summoning courage, tried to offer a toast, a heartfelt tribute to her daughter, Bronwyn had subtly, yet firmly, cut her off, turning the attention back to Sterling and their amazing life journey, a casual dismissal that spoke volumes. Serafina had smiled, a polite, practiced smile, but inside, a small, vital piece of her soul had chipped away, falling into the growing chasm of her disillusionment. The disrespect wasn't always overt. It was in the casual way Bronwyn would dismiss her mother's opinions on everything from interior design to global economics, often with a patronizing pat on the arm or a condescending laugh. It was in Sterling's constant, thinly veiled requests for more capital for his increasingly dubious ventures, always prefaced with how important this was for Bronwyn's future or the grandchildren's legacy, as if she were merely an instrument for their advancement. They actively excluded her from their social circle, never inviting her to their exclusive club events or their intimate dinner parties, even while relying on her funds to maintain the illusion of their elevated status. Serafina would see photographs of them in society magazines, smiling, surrounded by their friends, and she would feel a pang of loneliness so sharp it often brought tears to her eyes in the quiet solitude of her evenings. Serafina often rationalized her enduring generosity. It's for their happiness, she would tell herself, watching Bronwyn sparkle at another society event, wishing for just a fraction of that sparkle to be directed at her. Family comes first, she'd whisper, signing off on another multi-million-dollar transfer, ignoring the quiet warnings of her loyal staff. She longed for connection, for gratitude, for just a moment where they saw her as a person, not a limitless financial resource. But instead, her quiet support had fostered an insatiable entitlement, a deep-seated belief that her money was not a gift, but an unquestionable right, a natural extension of their birth. The years of emotional neglect and financial exploitation had accumulated, leaving Serafina feeling like a hollowed-out vessel, her love and wealth poured out without a single drop returned. The sorrow was a constant companion, a dull ache that had become an almost intrinsic part of her existence, a quiet despair she had learned to live with. Until that night. The night Bronwyn, with cold, brutal words, had finally extinguished the last flicker of hope, inadvertently igniting something far more powerful in its place, resolve. A cold, unyielding, and utterly liberating resolve. The morning after Bronwyn's outburst, Serafina awoke not with the familiar weight of sorrow that had been her constant companion for so long, but with an unfamiliar lightness, almost a quiet hum of energy beneath her skin. The rage that had boiled over in Bronwyn had, paradoxically, clarified Serafina's own vision, stripping away the decades of self-deception and misplaced hope. The useless comment, the demand to get out, had severed the last, thin tether of obligation and emotional manipulation that had bound her for decades. There was no going back, no room for negotiation or reconciliation. Bronwyn had drawn a line, etched in venom, and Serafina, for the first time, was not only crossing it, but redrawing the entire map of her life. She rose early, not to the usual routine of a pampered widow, where days blurred into a gentle, melancholic rhythm, but with the crisp purpose of a CEO preparing for a hostile takeover, or a general planning a decisive campaign. She brewed a cup of her favorite Earl Grey tea, the comforting aroma of bergamot filling her modest, yet elegant, study. This study, unlike the sprawling, opulent rooms of Bronwyn's mansion, felt like her own sanctuary, a place of quiet contemplation, filled with cherished books, a worn leather armchair, and framed photographs of Edward, his kind eyes smiling back at her. It was a space where her thoughts could truly breathe. Her first call was to her private banker, Mr. Alastair Davies, a man whose discretion was as legendary as his financial acumen. He had managed the Thorne family's immense wealth for over 30 years, bearing silent witness to Serafina's quiet generosity and her family's escalating demands. He knew, without her needing to say, the full extent of the financial web she had woven around Bronwyn and Sterling, a web he had often gently advised her against. Alastair, Serafina began, her voice calm and steady, devoid of any tremor of emotion, a new note of quiet authority resonating within it. Good morning. I need you to initiate a full cessation of all financial disbursements to Bronwyn and Sterling Beaumont, effective immediately. Mr. Davies, a man who rarely showed surprise, who had seen fortunes made and lost, paused for a beat, a flicker of something akin to knowing admiration in his eyes. Mrs. Thorne, may I confirm that you mean all disbursements? Including the mortgage payments on the estate, the luxury vehicle leases, the grandchildren's tuition, their credit card accounts, and any and all of Mr. Beaumont's venture funding? His voice was measured, professional, but Serafina detected a subtle undertone of approval. Precisely, Alistair. Every single direct and indirect payment. No exceptions. This is not a temporary measure. It is permanent. Serafina listed them methodically, the full extent of her prior generosity echoing in the precise details, each item a testament to years of unreciprocated giving. The monthly mortgage payment on the Beaumont estate, a staggering sum that had ensured their continued residence in the exclusive enclave, now a debt they alone would face. The leases on Bronwyn's custom-ordered Bentley Bentayga and Sterling's high-performance Porsche 911, both recently acquired, symbols of their heedless consumption. The tuition for Madison and Ethan's elite private schools, the Crestwood Academy and St. Jude's Preparatory, respectively, along with their various sports club memberships, private tutoring fees, and the cost of their annual skiing trips to Verbier. The automatic monthly payments on their array of platinum and black credit cards, which had allowed them to maintain an extravagant lifestyle without a single thought to their burgeoning debts, accumulated on everything from haute couture to exotic travel. The quarterly infusions of capital into Sterling's latest, sustainable energy, startup, which was, in reality, a black hole of investor funds, built on smoke and mirrors. Even the salaries for the household staff at the mansion, the chef, the house manager, the 2 nannies who were rarely seen, the 3 gardeners, were meticulously detailed for immediate termination. Understood, Mrs. Thorne, Mr. Davies replied, that faint note of admiration now more discernible in his voice. I will instruct the team to process this immediately. It will take a few hours for all systems to update, but the tap will be fully closed by midday. Consider it done. Next, she called her legal counsel, Ms. Eleanor Vance, a formidable attorney known for her unwavering loyalty and strategic brilliance, a woman Serafina trusted implicitly. Eleanor, I need you to prepare all necessary documentation to formally revoke any and all powers of attorney, financial authorizations, and any other legal instruments that grant Bronwyn or Sterling any access or claim to my assets. Furthermore, I anticipate potential legal challenges. I want a clear, comprehensive strategy to defend against any attempts to reclaim funds or dispute my decisions. Ensure all past gifts are legally documented as such, with no implied or explicit future obligations. Ms. Vance, equally unperturbed, her voice calm and confident, simply replied, Consider it done, Mrs. Thorne. I'll have the initial drafts for your review by this afternoon. This is a decisive move, and a strong one. I commend you. The implicit understanding in her voice was a comfort. Serafina hung up, a profound sense of calm washing over her. The silence in her study was no longer heavy with unspoken grief or the weight of unfulfilled obligation, but light with newfound freedom, with the quiet satisfaction of a decisive act. Meanwhile, in their grand mansion, Bronwyn and Sterling's world began its subtle, yet inexorable, unraveling. The first hiccup occurred mid-morning. Bronwyn, at an exclusive designer boutique on Rodeo Drive, attempted to purchase a new couture gown for an upcoming charity gala. Her platinum card, which had never failed her, was declined. Insufficient funds, the sales assistant stated apologetically, her eyes widening slightly at Bronwyn's immediate, furious expression. Bronwyn scoffed, a harsh, incredulous sound. Nonsense. There must be a system error. It's a black card. Run it again. But it was declined a second time, then a third. She stormed out, fuming, pulling out her phone to call Sterling, blaming the incompetent bank and the pathetic technology of the boutique. Sterling, too, encountered his first jolt an hour later. Attempting to book a private jet for an impromptu weekend trip to St. Bart's with his latest potential investors, his corporate black card, usually limitless, was also declined. He dismissed it as a temporary glitch, a result of some routine maintenance his bank must be performing, a minor inconvenience that would surely resolve itself. He tried another card, then another, all connected to Serafina's accounts, all seemingly boundless extensions of her wealth. All declined. A cold knot of unease, unfamiliar and unsettling, began to form in his stomach, a premonition of something far more significant than a mere technical error. By early afternoon, the calls began. The headmaster of Crestwood Academy called Bronwyn, his tone polite but firm, inquiring about the overdue tuition for Madison. Overdue? That's impossible. My mother handles all those payments, Bronwyn snapped, her voice laced with indignation, her sense of entitlement already at a fever pitch. The headmaster, however, insisted the payment had been due for 2 days and had just been flagged as delinquent, jeopardizing Madison's enrollment. A few hours later, Sterling's assistant, a perpetually frazzled young man, informed him that the lease payment for his Porsche had bounced, and the car dealership was demanding immediate payment or repossession. Then, the house manager at the mansion called, frantic, reporting that the payroll for the household staff had not gone through. "They're threatening to walk off the job, Mr. Beaumont. The chef just left mid-meal prep." Panic, cold and insidious, began to creep into their carefully constructed reality. This wasn't a bank error. This was something far more sinister, far more deliberate. They started checking their online banking portals, their fingers trembling as they navigated the familiar interfaces. Account after account, they found multiple accounts frozen or zeroed out, credit lines revoked, investment accounts drained of the capital Serafina had infused. The flow of money, once a mighty river that had sustained their every whim, had abruptly ceased, leaving them stranded in a parched desert of financial ruin. The mansion, once a symbol of their success and comfort, felt suddenly vast and cold, its luxurious furnishings mocking their growing terror, each expensive item a silent testament to a life that was now rapidly disappearing. They knew, with a dawning, sickening realization that curdled in their guts, who the silent architect of their misfortune was. Serafina. The woman they had just dismissed as useless. The following morning, the illusion of their invincible world completely shattered, Bronwyn and Sterling arrived at Serafina's more modest, yet undeniably elegant, residence. Their usual designer clothes were rumpled, carelessly thrown on, their faces pale with a mixture of raw rage, profound disbelief, and burgeoning, desperate panic. The carefully manicured facade of their lives had crumbled overnight, leaving behind a raw, exposed panic. They had not bothered to call ahead, storming up the front path as if their sheer indignation, their outraged sense of entitlement, could force open the doors of fortune once more, demanding entrance as a right. The door was answered not by a maid, but by Serafina herself. She stood composed, her posture relaxed yet regal, dressed in a simple, elegant silk blouse and tailored trousers, her silver hair impeccably styled, gleaming in the morning light. Her eyes, however, held no warmth, no flicker of the familiar maternal indulgence they had so often taken for granted. They were clear, resolute, and utterly unyielding, reflecting a steely determination that chilled them to the bone. "Mother, what in God's name have you done?" Bronwyn shrieked, her voice cracking with fury, a high-pitched sound of disbelief as she pushed past Serafina into the spacious foyer, Sterling hot on her heels, his own face a mask of furious indignation. "Our cards are being declined. The school is calling. They're threatening to repossess Sterling's car. Have you gone mad? You've ruined us." Sterling, usually more reserved in his manipulations, preferring subtle pressure to outright confrontation, chimed in, his voice trembling with barely suppressed rage, his carefully constructed composure unraveling. "Serafina, this is unacceptable. You are destroying everything. Our reputation, our standing in the community. How could you do this to your own family? To your grandchildren?" He attempted to play the victim, to invoke the very family loyalty they had so utterly failed to show her. Serafina merely closed the door softly behind them, the click echoing with ominous finality, sealing them in a space where her rules now applied. She turned, her gaze sweeping over their distraught faces, taking in their disarray, their blatant shock that their endless well of money had suddenly dried up. She saw the fear in their eyes, and surprisingly, felt no joy, only a quiet, weary satisfaction. "You asked me to leave, Bronwyn," Serafina stated, her voice quiet, almost conversational, yet it carried the weight of decades of unspoken pain, of swallowed indignities. "I left. And in leaving, I took back what was mine." Bronwyn stared, speechless for a moment, her mind struggling to process this unprecedented defiance, then launched into a torrent of accusations and emotional blackmail, her voice rising in pitch and volume. "This is monstrous. What about Madison and Ethan? Do you want them to be pariahs, thrown out of their schools? Do you want them to be shamed? How could you be so cruel to your own flesh and blood? After everything we've done for you." Her face contorted, a mixture of self-pity and genuine terror. "Done for me?" Serafina's voice, though still calm, held a razor's edge of incredulity, a quiet, devastating question. "What, precisely, have you ever done for me, Bronwyn? Besides empty my coffers and deplete my spirit? Did you comfort me after your father passed, when I was lost and utterly alone? Did you visit me when I was ill last winter, confined to bed for weeks? Did you ever once, in decades, ask me how I was, not what I could provide? Did you ever offer a single word of genuine gratitude, a single act of selfless kindness?" Sterling interjected, attempting to inject a dose of logic into the emotional chaos, to regain some control. "Serafina, this is irrational. We've always been a family. We've supported each other. You're overreacting to a minor disagreement. Think of the consequences. Your own legacy, grandmother, tarnished by this petty revenge." He tried to appeal to her sense of public image, the only thing he truly valued. Serafina let out a soft, almost imperceptible sigh, a sound not of anger, but of profound weariness, a deep exhaustion with their endless self-deception. "Legacy? My legacy, Sterling, is not measured in the number of luxury cars you drive or the size of the mansion you inhabit. My legacy is in the genuine connections I failed to forge because I was too busy being your financial lifeline. It is in the love I yearned for, but instead received only demands, only a bottomless well of entitlement." Her eyes fixed on Bronwyn, unwavering, unblinking. "You called me useless, Bronwyn. You screamed at me, in front of your children, in the very home I paid for, to get out. You dismissed my opinions as archaic. And for decades, I allowed you to treat me as an ATM, a boundless resource, a silent partner in your lavish charade. I paid for your Bentley, Bronwyn, and Sterling's Porsche. I paid for your designer wardrobe, your endless vacations, your staff, the chef, the gardeners, the house manager you never bothered to learn the name of. I paid for every single one of Sterling's failed ventures that bled millions from my accounts, ventures that were nothing more than glorified scams. I ensured Madison and Ethan attended the most exclusive schools, even as you neglected to ensure they offered a simple thank you to their grandmother, to the woman who made it all possible." Bronwyn's face was ashen. The shock of hearing the explicit, detailed list of her mother's generosity, each item a painful reminder of her own blatant ingratitude, thrown back at her with such quiet force, was palpable. But that's what family does. You have the money, mother. What else were you going to do with it? Let it sit in a vault? The words were a desperate, almost childlike plea, revealing the true depth of her distorted reality. "Yes, Bronwyn," Serafina said, a flicker of something akin to pity, a fleeting sorrow for the person her daughter had become, in her eyes. "I was going to use it to live my own life, for once. To travel, to pursue hobbies, to connect with people who value me for who I am, not for what I possess. You have systematically stripped me of my dignity, my self-worth, and my peace. You have taken and taken, without a single thought to the person behind the purse strings, without a single moment of genuine appreciation. That night, you finally cut the cord. and I merely ensured it remained severed. Permanently. Sterling, desperate, his carefully constructed world collapsing around him, tried a different tactic. Serafina, please. Let's talk about this. We can work something out. What do you want? An apology? We'll apologize. We'll be more considerate. Just don't do this. We'll lose everything. Our entire future. His voice was a pathetic whine, completely devoid of the usual bravado. You will lose everything, Sterling, Serafina confirmed, her voice eerily calm, resonating with an undeniable finality. Because everything you possess was never truly yours. It was mine, generously lent, and now irrevocably reclaimed. The mortgage payments ceased yesterday. Your car leases are terminated. Your credit lines are closed. The children's tuition is unpaid. You said you didn't need my archaic opinions. Well, you don't need my money either. You will now learn to stand on your own 2 feet, a lesson I should have allowed you to learn decades ago, but a lesson you must now face. Bronwyn collapsed onto a nearby fauteuil, a luxurious piece of furniture Serafina had personally selected years ago, tears streaming down her face. They were not tears of remorse, not of regret for her actions, but of sheer terror and profound self-pity, for the loss of her gilded life. You're ruining us. You're a cruel, vengeful woman, she sobbed, burying her face in her hands. Serafina merely inclined her head slightly, her gaze steady. No, Bronwyn. You ruined yourselves. I simply stopped paying for the illusion. My decision is final. There will be no reversal, no negotiation. You asked me to get out of your lives. I have. And I assure you, it is the most liberating decision I have ever made. The silence that followed was deafening, filled only with Bronwyn's ragged sobs and Sterling's heavy, panicked breathing. They stood there, 2 adults stripped bare of their perceived power and privilege, facing the unyielding gaze of the woman they had so carelessly dismissed. The realization that Serafina was not only serious, but also utterly unmovable, was a crushing blow, shattering their last vestiges of hope. They had come to manipulate, to threaten, to beg. Instead, they had been met with an unassailable strength, and the chilling truth of their own profound ingratitude. Defeated, stunned, and with the first cold tendrils of true fear coiling in their guts, Bronwyn and Sterling stumbled out of Serafina's home, leaving the dignified silence of her foyer for the brutal, unforgiving reality awaiting them outside. Bronwyn and Sterling returned to their opulent mansion, not as conquerors, but as defeated refugees. The gilded cage they had so lovingly built for themselves now felt like a gilded tomb, its walls closing in with terrifying speed. The silence within the house was no longer one of peace, but of impending doom, broken only by Bronwyn's ragged sobs and Sterling's frantic, impotent pacing through the vast, suddenly empty-feeling rooms. The calls started almost immediately upon their return, a relentless barrage that shattered any remaining illusion of control. The bank called, informing them that the mortgage was in default and foreclosure proceedings would begin within 30 days if the staggering sum wasn't paid. A representative from the Bentley dealership called, curtly stating that the lease agreement had been terminated due to non-payment, and the vehicle would be repossessed by the end of the week. The Porsche dealership followed suit, their tone equally unsympathetic. The headmasters of both Crestwood Academy and St. Jude's Preparatory called again, their tones now firm and unyielding, stating that unless the overdue tuition and fees were paid by the end of the day, Madison and Ethan would not be allowed to return to classes. The children, overhearing their parents' increasingly desperate and loud arguments, their raised voices echoing through the empty halls, began to understand the gravity of their situation. Madison, usually dismissive and absorbed in her social media, became tearful and enraged, screaming about her social life being ruined, her designer clothes suddenly meaningless. Ethan, quieter and more analytical, retreated to his room, his world of elite sports and academic privilege crumbling around him, the future he had taken for granted suddenly non-existent. The household staff, unpaid for 2 days and receiving no communication from their employers, abandoned the mansion en masse, leaving behind a sprawling house that suddenly felt cold, empty, and overwhelmingly vast. The gourmet kitchen, once bustling with activity, was now eerily silent, the unwashed dishes in the sink a stark symbol of their new reality. Bronwyn, who hadn't cooked a meal or cleaned a surface in decades, stared in bewildered horror at the dust motes dancing in the sunbeams, at the growing piles of laundry. The pool, once sparkling, began to develop a green film, the gardens turning wild. Their high-spending habits, previously sustained by Serafina's endless cash flow, now became their undoing. Their numerous credit cards, once a symbol of their limitless wealth, were all frozen, rendering them powerless. Dinners out, luxury shopping sprees, spontaneous trips to exotic locales, all ceased abruptly, replaced by anxiety and budget constraints. Their social circles, which revolved almost entirely around wealth and status, quickly began to unravel. Friends, who were more fair-weather acquaintances, subtly distanced themselves once the rumors of their financial woes began to spread like wildfire through their exclusive community. Invitations stopped coming. Whispers followed them in grocery stores, their once envied lives now a subject of morbid fascination and schadenfreude. Bronwyn discovered her calls were not being returned, her invitations to exclusive clubs suddenly revoked. Arguments between Bronwyn and Sterling became constant, vicious cycles of blame and recrimination. Bronwyn accused Sterling of his failed ventures and his inability to provide, his big ideas, now just hollow jokes. Sterling retorted, blaming Bronwyn's extravagant spending and her outright insulting their mother, pointing out her complete lack of any marketable skills. They were two shipwrecked sailors, blaming each other for the storm, oblivious to the fact that their own arrogance and ingratitude had set them adrift. Their marriage, built on a foundation of inherited wealth and shared privilege, began to crack under the immense pressure. Within weeks, the repossession notices arrived for the cars. The Bentley and the Porsche, once symbols of their success, were unceremoniously towed away, leaving empty spaces in the vast garage, stark reminders of what they had lost. The notice for the mansion's foreclosure soon followed, a stark, legal document that signified the end of their lavish dream. They were forced to begin the painful process of packing, sorting through mountains of designer clothes, expensive art, and antique furniture, much of it purchased with Serafina's money. Each item became a painful reminder of the life they had lost, a life they had taken for granted, a life built on someone else's generosity. They would eventually move into a much smaller, rented house in a less prestigious neighborhood, their social standing plummeting as rapidly as their net worth. The once proud Beaumonts were now a cautionary tale. Meanwhile, Serafina Thorne was embarking on her new life. The immediate aftermath of her decision was characterized by a profound sense of lightness. The chronic ache in her heart, the constant pressure of their demands, the suffocating weight of unreciprocated love, it had simply vanished, replaced by an expansive feeling of peace. It was as if a decades-long burden had been lifted from her shoulders, allowing her to finally stand tall. Her first act of self-care was simple, yet profoundly meaningful. She called an old university friend, Clara, whom she hadn't spoken to in years, mostly due to Bronwyn's subtle disapproval of Serafina having friends outside the family circle, implying such connections were beneath their status. Clara, a vivacious artist with a laugh like wind chimes, answered with delight, genuinely surprised but thrilled to hear from Serafina. Serafina simply said, "Clara, I'm free. Truly free. And I'd love to take that painting class with you we always talked about, the one by the old harbor." The next day, Serafina booked a solo trip to Italy, a journey she had always dreamed of but had continuously postponed due to various family emergencies that always seemed to require her immediate financial intervention. She wanted to walk through the ancient ruins of Rome, savor authentic Tuscan cuisine in sun-drenched vineyards, and lose herself in the art of Florence, all on her own terms, without a single thought to anyone else's schedule or desires. It was a pilgrimage of self-reclamation, a journey to rediscover the woman she had once been and the woman she was meant to be. She felt a quiet excitement she hadn't experienced in decades, a genuine anticipation for a future that was finally, truly, her own. The world, once a heavy burden of expectation, now felt like an open invitation, vast and full of possibilities. Months passed, stretching into a year. For Serafina Thorne, it was a year of profound transformation, a blossoming into the vibrant woman she had always been beneath the layers of obligation and sorrow. Her life, once defined by the ceaseless demands of others, was now meticulously crafted by her own desires, her own passions, her own pace. Her trip to Italy had been nothing short of revelatory. She had spent weeks wandering through sun-drenched piazzas, marveling at the masterpieces in the Uffizi Gallery, savoring every bite of fresh pasta and every sip of local wine. She met fellow travelers from all walks of life, engaging in genuine conversations, sharing laughter and stories, free from the crushing weight of her family's expectations or the need to maintain an image. She learned to truly listen, to truly observe. She continued her adventures, taking a luxury cruise through the majestic Norwegian fjords, then exploring the bustling, colorful markets of Marrakesh, her senses alive with new experiences. She wasn't just seeing the world, she was rediscovering herself within it, finding joy in the simplest of moments, a quiet smile from a stranger, the perfect cup of coffee. Back home, Serafina embraced new hobbies with a passion she hadn't felt since her youth. She enrolled in art classes with Clara, finding solace and joy in the tactile experience of oil paints on canvas, creating bold, expressive landscapes that reflected her newfound freedom. Her garden, once a mere aesthetic backdrop maintained by staff, became a vibrant personal project, overflowing with fragrant roses and aromatic herbs she tended with her own hands, finding deep satisfaction in the simple act of nurturing life. She joined a book club, engaging in lively discussions with women who valued her insights and experiences, not her bank account, forming genuine friendships based on shared interests and mutual respect. She also began discreetly funding local charities that focused on empowering women and children in need, finding genuine fulfillment in giving to those who truly needed it and expressed sincere gratitude, a stark contrast to her past experiences. She maintained a quiet, elegant life, devoid of ostentation, but rich in personal connection, intellectual stimulation, and profound peace. Her home, though not a mansion, was a sanctuary, filled with warmth, genuine laughter, and the serene quietude she had long craved. She was no longer just a wealthy widow, a silent ATM, she was an independent, thriving woman, truly free, truly alive. For Bronwyn and Sterling, life had become a harsh, relentless lesson in self-reliance, stripped bare of the opulence they had once considered their birthright. They now lived in a modest, three-bedroom house in a suburban community, a stark contrast to their former sprawling estate. The reality of budgeting, of paying their own bills, of managing a household without staff, hit them with the force of a tidal wave, each day a new struggle. Sterling, his reputation in tatters, struggled immensely to find legitimate work. His grand ventures were now a punchline in the elite circles he once frequented. He eventually took a sales job, a position he considered beneath him, but one that provided a steady, albeit meager, income, forcing him to engage in actual work for the first time in his life. Bronwyn, for the first time in her life, was forced to learn to cook, to clean, to grocery shop, and to manage a household budget, navigating the unfamiliar aisles of a supermarket. The initial shock had given way to a grudging acceptance, laced with deep resentment, but acceptance nonetheless. She missed her lavish lifestyle, her social standing, and the endless stream of new designer clothes, but the necessity of survival forced her to adapt, however reluctantly. Madison and Ethan, pulled from their elite private schools, had to adjust to public school, a world utterly alien to them. They chafed at the lack of designer brands, the absence of private tutors, and the necessity of taking public transport, feeling acutely the sting of their changed circumstances. Yet, slowly, painfully, they began to learn resilience. Ethan, stripped of his expensive athletic equipment and elite coaches, discovered a passion for a sport he could play at the local park, a sport that didn't require exorbitant fees or exclusive memberships. Madison, stripped of her superficial social circle, began to form genuine friendships for the first time, learning that true connection wasn't based on one's parents' wealth or social standing. There was no dramatic reconciliation with Serafina. The bridge had been burned too thoroughly, the wounds too deep, and Serafina, though not vengeful, had no desire to re-enter that cycle of exploitation. But in their forced independence, Bronwyn and Sterling, and even their children, were, perhaps, finally beginning to learn the value of something money could not buy: resilience, self-sufficiency, and the true cost of ingratitude. Serafina Thorne, once a silent ATM, was now a woman truly living, her heart lightened by the knowledge that she had finally chosen herself, and in doing so, had found the invaluable treasure of true freedom. Her story was a quiet testament to a universal truth: love and respect cannot be bought, no matter how vast the fortune. Genuine affection is earned through kindness, gratitude, and mutual regard. And sometimes, the most profound act of love one can offer, even to their own children, is to allow them to face the consequences of their actions, enabling them to learn, however painfully, the invaluable lesson of self-sufficiency. Ultimately, the greatest loyalty one can show is to oneself, to protect one's peace and dignity, even if it means dismantling the very foundations of a dysfunctional family. Serafina had not sought revenge, she had sought liberation. And in her liberation, she found a life richer and more fulfilling than any sum of money could ever provide. She found her peace. And that, dear viewers, is the powerful tale of Serafina Thorne, a woman who reclaimed her life and her dignity against all odds. Her story is a stark reminder that true worth lies not in wealth, but in respect, self-love, and genuine human connection. If you were moved by Serafina's journey from quiet despair to profound liberation, you'll find many more stories of justice, resilience, and life-changing decisions right here on our channel. We explore tales that challenge our perceptions of family, wealth, and the true meaning of happiness. Don't miss out on our next powerful narrative. Be sure to subscribe to our channel and hit that notification bell so you're always the first to know when a new story drops. And now, we want to hear from you. Have you ever faced such blatant ingratitude from someone you've helped? Or perhaps, like Serafina, have you ever had to make a drastic decision to protect your own peace and well-being? Share your thoughts and experiences in the comments below. We read every single one. Thank you for watching, and we'll see you in the next story.